Thank you everybody for joining us. We are going to jump into our next session at 12 p.m. or 3 p.m. Eastern Time. We have joining us today Dr. Carolyn Compton, and she will be presenting the topic Medicine, Science, Public Service, and Education in an Ever-Evolving Career. Dr. Carolyn Compton is a professor of life sciences at Arizona State University, a professor of laboratory medicine and pathology at Mayo Clinic, a professor of pathology at Johns Hopkins University, and the medical director for the ASU Biodesign Clinical Testing Laboratory. She was one of the first women to receive her MDPhD from Harvard Medical School and was a former professor of pathology at Harvard as well. Please welcome Dr. Compton as she discusses this amazing topic. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Compton.
Thank you, Alexia. I am thrilled to be here, and I'm so appreciative of the invitation, the opportunity to talk to you all today. So I will share my screen, hopefully, without issue, and get started. I was asked to talk about myself more or less and to impart to you what I've learned in my journey through my career. I've had a long and successful career, and I have learned lots of things as I've moved along. And if any of it can be of help to any of you listening, I will consider that the greatest success of my career. I don't know how to advance this now. Can you all see my screen? Alexia, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I see it. Okay. I am a pathologist, and I'm double boarded in both anatomic and clinical pathology, and I'll explain a little bit about what that is as I go along. But in general, a pathologist is a physician who diagnoses diseases through the characteristic changes that they produce in tissues and cells and fluids, from the morphologic level all the way down to the molecular level. So in fact, we never see patients. We see parts of patients, things that come out of them or off of them, and we are behind the scenes making the diagnosis of their disease. We are primarily diagnosticians. And this is what I love about pathology, because I love making the diagnosis. And the harder the diagnosis is to make, the more thrilling it is and satisfying it is to be able to serve a patient in that way and diagnose their problem. You function as a consultant to other clinicians. So you're really part of a team. You never really interact primarily with the patient, him or herself. You're also a forensic specialist. You're often solving mysteries, basically. And you can, in fact, specialize in forensic pathology. I think everyone knows what forensic pathologists do now, because there are so many CSI-like crime shows on TV, and the roles that the pathologists play in solving crimes are critical. You're a mystery solver. I love this function of pathologists, but more than anything, what I love is being the last word, the final word. Pathology is still the gold standard of diagnosis, and until the pathologist tells you that the patient has a cancer and tells you what kind of cancer it is, for example, no definitive therapy is initiated. That's standard of care. So you're really sitting at a critical point in the care and management of the patient. And in point of fact, more than 80% of the objective measurable data in a patient's medical record comes from the pathology department. Many patients have the misconception that when you take a biopsy and send it to the lab, and when the lab sends you back a report, we'll know what it is and we'll know what to do. And pathologists get the idea that their biopsy is getting dropped into a machine and the result is coming out the bottom, when in fact, it's a core of extremely well-trained, it's a long and arduous training to become a pathologist, who are behind the scenes functioning as their physician in a consultative role. This is why I love pathology. It's highly cerebral. You get to look at disease deeply and broadly in a way that you never do in any other specialty in medicine. You don't see patients, as I mentioned, at least alive. Doing autopsies is part of the training. And in fact, you learn more about disease in a very graphic, up close and personal way doing an autopsy than you do in any other fashion. And in fact, autopsies are still the quality control on all our powerful imaging. Who's to know if the MRI machine is wrong? The pathologist is the one to say that. I liked not seeing, interacting, and treating patients. And the reason was I know myself and my personality too well to be comfortable interacting with patients in such in critical situations, especially where medicine has very little to offer to help them. I am too empathetic, and my emotional reaction to patients was too extreme to really be able to think clearly to help them in the best way possible. So in fact, for me, not seeing patients is the right choice. And many people are shy about admitting that not seeing patients might be a choice that they would gravitate toward. Just because the interaction of a patient and doctor is a historically sacred thing. And if you are good at that and that is what makes you happy, that's the kind of doctor I want to take care of me. But in the meantime, this is the best choice for someone like me. It has the widest range of technologies at your fingertips in the pathology laboratory, in all of the medical landscape. And we use techniques that are ancient. The H&E slide under the light microscope is a technique with formalin fixation that's 150, 200 years old, to the cutting edge, to next-gen sequencing, to mass spec, and even more exciting technologies that are moving into the medical laboratory. We sit at the interface between science and medicine, so it is the perfect place to be able to balance research, teaching, and clinical practice. All my life, I practiced high volume clinical practice, at least when I was at the teaching hospitals where I was on the faculty. Now I run a COVID laboratory, so I'm still doing high volume clinical practice, but in a very pointed way for the pandemic. But because you have at your fingertips all of the representations of the patient's biology and the biology of their disease, their tissues, their organs, their bloods, their urine, all of these specimens, these biospecimens that are the representation of the patient, you have great libraries of these specimens that come to you for diagnosis and then are put aside and can be reused for patient care down the road or for translational research, of course, all with the patient's consent. Pathology represents lifelong learning at the bleeding cutting edge of biomedicine. And I have learned through my life to be comfortable with never knowing it all. In fact, I've come to the conclusion that once you feel comfortable, once you think you know it all, you're a malpractice suit waiting to happen. Pathology represents an endlessly varied opportunity landscape because you know so much about clinical medicine. You have a special skill that no clinicians possess, which is the ability to interpret biospecimens for patient care. And you can use these skills in so many aspects of biomedicine and beyond even clinical practice or research. You can use them in law, you can use them in medicine, in businesses that are related to medicine, and we need more physicians in those in those industries and in those practices. This is a short snapshot of where I came from and where I am now. It required me in my path to make multiple physical moves and be willing to do that. It represented multiple great intellectual leaps for me and big growth spurts. And I can tell you that at every step along the way, for every line on this slide, I was terrified. So the basic premise is that you're always going to feel, if you're pushing yourself, you're always going to feel inadequate, and you grow into the new goals that you set for yourself. I came from a non-academic family. No one in my family had ever even gone to college, let alone higher education, or were in professional lines of service. So for me, it meant that I was on my own. I had very high college board scores and won a scholarship, but I didn't even know what to do with it because I had no advice that would help me, point me in the right direction. My entire career I owe to the boy who sat behind me in homeroom for years in high school, who was appalled that I hadn't applied to college at the end of our senior year, and asked me if I would allow his father to help me. And it turned out his father was a professor of psychiatry at Bryn Mawr. And Bryn Mawr College is a seven-sister school that was the equivalent of the Ivy League at a time when the Ivy League was all male. So I was able to use my scholarship for a complete payment of the tuition and the board for one of the best colleges in the country. And in fact, when I was in medical school, found out later that it was #1 in the country, as according to US News and World Report, as to its productivity quotient, so-called, which was basically the percentage of students in its undergraduate body that went on to higher degrees. Bryn Mawr was at the top, and it changed my life because it led me to believe that I could be a scholar, and to tell me, in fact, to whisper in my ear to how scholars behave and what habits they have. And I had wonderful faculty whom I could emulate. I went on to get a biology degree in embryology. I took my junior year abroad at the University of Geneva and studied child psychology with Jean Piaget. Another suggestion that I might make to you is don't be afraid to study your passions, to think out of the box. At the end of the day, magically, these things all make you very unique in terms of your experience. I went from there to Harvard Medical School, where, as Alexia said, I was the first woman admitted into Harvard's MD-PhD program. And in fact, at the time, I was the only woman. There were 19 guys and myself. So I was largely ignored. And this also stood me in good stead for the rest of my career because I learned to function independently. I was in that program for 7 years. And I did my internship and residency in pathology at the Brigham and Women's Hospital, which is the second largest Harvard teaching hospital. I trained in anatomic pathology, looking down the microscope and making diagnoses, and in clinical pathology, which is laboratory medicine. And I got my first job about 30 miles away from Boston at UMass Medical School, which was a brand new medical school at the time and was full of Harvard overflow. It had a very young and dynamic faculty, and my first job out of training was to be the chief of anatomic pathology at an academic medical center. I was thrilled by that too, but my research that I had started during residency was still going on back in Boston. And after 3 years, I moved back back to Harvard and became the chief of gastrointestinal pathology, which was my specialty, at Massachusetts General Hospital, because magically, the minute I arrived, the chief of GI pathology, who was a very experienced person, quit. And there was a vacancy available, and we were in a staff meeting, and someone said, who has training in GI? And I put up my hand. And within 24 hours, I was the chief of the second largest clinical service in pathology at the largest Harvard teaching hospital. I was scared to death, but it was so motivating. And then a couple of years later, due to the research that I was doing in tissue engineering, I became the chief of pathology at the Shriners Burn Hospital. It's for pediatric burns. So this was all children, and it was all point of care testing for very, very sick patients. And that was heart-wrenching as well as motivating. I left Harvard after many years because I had reached the glass ceiling, if you will. Harvard didn't make women chiefs of service, and I wanted to be a department chair in pathology. So I went to my husband's old alma mater, McGill Medical School in Quebec, in Canada. It was a new medical setting. I was in charge of 5 teaching hospitals. I had Sir William Osler's chair of pathology at the university. I was in charge of all teaching and research and all clinical service at all 5 of the teaching hospitals. And it was all in French. And it was a healthcare system that was centralized and run by the government. So I learned a lot during those 5 years, but was recruited back to the United States because I met the National Cancer Institute director at a meeting. And he said to me, how would you like to come to the NCI and build a national biobank for the United States? Oh, well, that was an offer I couldn't refuse. So I pulled up stakes again, moved to Bethesda, Maryland, became the director of the Office of Biorepositories and Biospecimen Research at the National Cancer Institute. And during that time was a professor of pathology at Johns Hopkins, which was my academic appointment. But I left there after 7 years to take another, what I thought of as an extraordinary opportunity in the private sector, to be the CEO and president of a public-private partnership with the Food and Drug Administration, and became the CEO of the Critical Path Institute. But after a year, I was recruited to Tempe, to ASU, and to Mayo Clinic by my old colleagues from the NCI who wanted to start not-for-profit organizations that would address the most critical problems in biomedicine that affect us today. And I moved there to become a professor at ASU and Mayo Clinic, but also the chief medical officer of the National Biomarker Development Alliance. And that's where my heart is today. I want to change medicine for the better before I die, and I need all of my colleagues, like-minded, optimistic, and energetic to do that. So I'm just going to run through a few of the highlights of my career that taught me big lessons, and lessons that I would like to pass on to you. When I got to Harvard, I was, I knew no one. I was completely alone. I went there because it seemed to me like the opportunity of a lifetime. I went there and looked around for people who were admirable and magnetic and accessible. I looked around for great mentors. And I found the chair of the anatomy department at Harvard Medical School. His name was Don Fawcett. In fact, all the students affectionately called him the Don. And I went directly to the Don, and I asked him if I could study under him and get my PhD under him, because at the time I was interested in population control. I thought I wanted to work for the WHO, and I wanted to invent the male pill. I went to Dr. Fawcett, not only because he was a wonderful person, and and a magnetic leader, but also because he was the world's expert in spermatogenesis at the time, and he was also the author of the Bible of histology used at Harvard Medical School at that time, Bloom and Fawcett. But after 2 years of working with Dr. Fawcett, he got promoted to become a dean at Harvard, and he advised me to choose another advisor, PhD advisor, who would be in the laboratory with me. And I chose Dr. Elio Raviola, who had taught us anatomy and was one of the most dynamic, riveting teachers I had ever met. And sure enough, Elio changed my life and changed my my view of science, and also showed me the extreme dedication to detail and the love of the subject that can carry you through to a successful career. After I got my MD and PhD, I was looking for the next step to build on what I had learned in the anatomy department, understanding how form and function fit together, and had discovered pathology by accident because one of the professors who was on my thesis defense committee was Ramsey Cotran, who was a luminary in the field of pathology, about which I knew very little at the time. But he was the chief of pathology at the second largest teaching hospital at Harvard, the Brigham and Women's Hospital. He, along with Dr. Stanley Robbins, were also gods of medicine. And they were the authors of, again, the Bible of pathology, known as the pathologic basis of disease. This is the way it looked when I was there. But in fact, this is the way it looks today. With the gray cover, it's been through innumerable editions, and both Dr. Cotran and Dr. Robbins are no longer with us, but their legacy carries on. And when I was a resident, they offered me the chance, the chance here, if I can. Oh, Alexia, I'm frozen. I don't know quite what happened.
Maybe exit out and come back in again.
Let me try that. I can't.
Are you presenting through PowerPoint?
I can't even get out of full screen. I'm in a real bind here. I don't know what I did. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to try it again.
Maybe press the escape
All
button.
right, okay, here we are. Yes, now let's see. So it worked, thank you. So when I was a resident, I became chief resident, and the chief resident's job is to teach the younger residents how to be successful in the training program. And I did that and taught them a lot of hardcore pathology right at the microscope and during conferences that I gave. And Dr. Cotran and Dr. Robbins thought that I had talent as a teacher and encouraged me to write a companion book that went along with their textbook of pathology. I was stunned. I'd never written anything, let alone a book. And this is when the imposter syndrome set in for me in industrial strength levels, because I said yes, even though I was terrified. I sat down and started to write. And 3 editions later, when I look at the covers of those books, I think, and they were translated into 15 different languages. They sold very well. I was only thinking of myself as an author after I actually authored those books, not beforehand. And there's a lesson in this, that you will grow into what you're pretending to be, but you're never going to feel comfortable up front. While I was training, I gravitated toward the specialty of gastrointestinal disease largely because of this man. Harvey Goldman was a gastrointestinal pathologist extraordinaire, but he also was a master teacher and recognized and honored for that. I gravitated, I thought anything that he's interested in has got to be interesting to me. And in fact, it was. And I studied not formally under him, but just followed in his footsteps. And in fact, I'm now cited in this book, Keen Minds to Explore the Dark Continents of Disease, which is a history of the Massachusetts General Hospital. And I'm named in there as MGH's gastrointestinal pathologist. So you never know where your hero worship will take you. You, in fact, could be the next role model. But this was my world. This was my world and the world that I loved. It was my passion. It involved teaching at the microscope every single day. It meant looking at patterns of diseases on so many levels and tissues and cells on a molecular level. It meant doing stat diagnoses in the operating room so that my colleagues in surgery would be able to know exactly what was going on a microscopic level in real time and make the right decisions. In the medical laboratory, it was all about machines and robotics. In fact, cool technology, which still fascinates me today, was my world in laboratory medicine. And I worked with teams of people in both settings. Teams of people, teams of technologists who worked with me in the laboratory, teams of clinicians to whom I served as consultant and from whom I learned, and who sat with me at the microscope every single day to go over all of the tissues and the diagnoses from their patients so that they understood on my level exactly, they could see it with their own eyes. And to me, that was absolutely the pinnacle of my day when I was able to interact with my clinical colleagues that way and know that I had helped their patients in such a definitive fashion. I was also blessed by meeting some of the giants of science who were at Harvard. Harvard was, Massachusetts General Hospital in specific, was a main member hospital of one of the biggest adult clinical trials group funded by the National Cancer Institute. So this was an organization with 250 different hospitals and 25 main member institutions, big academic medical centers and cancer centers, are best in the country. And we did clinical trials to try and get new meritorious therapies to patients as quickly as possible and prove that they were efficacious and prove that they were safe. And we did it as a team. This was the apotheosis of teamwork. And I met some of my national and international colleagues that are nearest and dearest to me today, and I still work with some of them. I also, nearer to home, in the Shriners Burn Hospital, met Dr. Howard Green, who came from MIT, moved to Harvard because he was the first scientist ever to successfully culture normal human skin cells. And he found a method to expand them in the laboratory from the size of a postage stamp to the size of a tablecloth, 3 square meters, for example, within the span of a couple of weeks. He was looking for something to do with this discovery that would benefit patients. And I worked with 2 plastic surgeons and the head of the Shriners Burn Institute to be able to culture the skin of patients who had been burned over massive amounts of their body, culture their own skin and replant them to the burn wounds successfully. It was the first time that a cultured organ had ever been used in a life-saving setting, and this technique is still used today. No one had ever lived through burns as big as 98% or 99% before this technique came along, and it was a first in medicine. I think of this as my 15 minutes of fame per Andy Warhol. We were on the front pages of the New York Times and that great arbiter of medical science, People magazine. But it was wonderful and thrilling. And I was able to take that experience from Harvard to McGill, and from McGill, and I worked with many more international organizations because I was not considered an ugly American so much as a Canadian with a kinder, gentler approach to international collaborations. And I took that mentality and that experience to the National Cancer Institute. I was offered the chance to be part of science and medicine at the next level. Big science, big budgets, big agendas run through and funded by taxpayer dollars at the National Institutes of Health. So I became the leader of the office that I established. It went from one person, me, to 46 people by the time I left. We built a national biobank called the Cancer Human Biobank, or CA Hub, which had extraordinarily high quality specimens of very unusual types that were made available to big team science projects across the NIH, never before possible without these specimens, and open to our best science in the private sector. I was able to lead not only the office that eliminated to the greatest degree possible the garbage in, garbage out paradigm of all science performed on human specimens at the national level. But I also ran a program, in fact, I salvaged a program which people were going to jettison called IMAP, the Innovative Molecular Analysis Technologies for Cancer. To do that, I had to convince the National Cancer Advisory Board and the Board of Scientific Advisors of the NCI that this program was worth refunding, and it still exists today. It is a high-risk, high-impact program that funds new scientific ideas, and some of these have been absolutely transformative in biomedicine, and I consider that one of my greatest achievements. In fact, I'm listed here with a bunch of luminaries, so I just had to point out that in some of the presentations being made about how the NCI has moved science forward in the last 20 years, I am privileged and honored to be among luminaries that include some of the best scientists in the country, the best leaders at the NIH, and I think of that as as the pinnacle of my scientific existence. But I took that knowledge and that experience back to the private sector when I realized that some of my goals could not be fixed. They couldn't be reached. Some of the problems I saw could not be fixed from the purview of the federal government. And I didn't even want the federal government tinkering around in the practice of medicine to fix some of these problems. So I went back to the private sector, joined some of my colleagues who had been at the NCI, who ran big programs in informatics, and in fact, my old boss from the NCI, the deputy director of the NCI, who designed and co-led the biggest team science project ever performed at the National Cancer Institute. The cancer, it's called TCGA, the Cancer Genome Atlas Project, which cataloged all the genomic changes in all of the major cancers and made all of the data publicly available. An incredible achievement, but there were still problems to be solved. So we formed the National Biomarker Development Alliance. We analyzed what was wrong on the national scale to get a new biomarker. Biomarkers are in critical demand and in very short supply in our new vision of precision medicine. So I continue to go forward today in this not-for-profit, linking with the government hand in glove to be able to achieve solutions for some of our biggest problems. I do this also through professional organizations where I hold leadership positions, the College of American Pathologists, which sets the standard for 18,000 practicing pathologists across the country and accredits our laboratories, the American Joint Committee on Cancer, which develops the staging systems for all the cancers used worldwide. It is the standard of care. And all of these things melded together are what is going to change medicine for the better in the future. So I see my career now as focusing in on the most critical problems in medicine. And that's on one end. And on the other end, it's to inspire people like you. It's to teach at ASU. I just had a book published, another one, Cancer, the Enemy from Within, that matches the course that I give to 400 pre-med, pre-health students on cancer every single semester at Arizona State University. And I am proud to be the faculty advisor for the American Medical Women's Association chapter at ASU, where I met Alexia and other magnificent students at ASU who will go on to pick up the baton and get over the goal line of the best medicine using the best science and the best technology for the maximum benefit of patients at the lowest cost. Value in medicine, value for the patients. So this is my last slide. What can I tell you from this journey? Know who you are from the very beginning. Know your hardwired personality. I would have been miserable and unsuccessful if I had tried to shoehorn my personality into a career in internal medicine. I revealed that from the very beginning to you, that my natural aptitudes scholastically had to meet and match my emotional set points, my personality and my reactions to things. I could never have been successful if those things were not in sync. Take a personality test, find out who you are, and plan your career choices around your hardwired personality. Build on your strengths and work on your weaknesses. You're going to need to recognize where your watch out areas are and to learn techniques to help yourself to deal with your weaknesses. Everybody has them and they're never going to go away. So it's a learning experience throughout life. Follow your heart first and your brain second. I think this is probably the most poignant advice I can give you, because if you're making your choices intellectually and your spirit is not there, you won't be successful because you won't be happy. Be a great team player. If there's anything I've seen through my years in medicine, is that it's evolved from the single lone physician interacting with the patient alone to a team sport where every member of the team has an incredibly valuable contribution to make, and the best medicine cannot be achieved without all members pulling equally for the patient. If you're not anxious, you're not stretching far enough. Don't ever expect to be comfortable. Be resilient instead, not ruthless. You're going to go down, you're going to meet obstacles, but the secret is to get up again with optimism. Practice relentless optimism, in fact, throughout your entire career. And I love this little saying. It's something that guides me. If it's not okay, in the end of a struggle that you're going through, it's not the end. So it will be okay if you stick in there. And this is my last piece of advice because it's core to everything else I've said. Success is not the key to happiness. You're not going to be happy if you become successful. Happiness is the key to success. And in fact, happiness itself is not a station to arrive at, but a manner of traveling. So think about your own happiness, because once you're happy, you're going to be able to deliver the best of you to your patients in your healthcare career. And I wish every one of you the very best in that journey. So happy traveling, everybody. And I'm certainly willing and happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Compton. Your presentation was phenomenal. You are so inspiring, and I'm so proud to have you as a mentor at ASU and for all the students who are attending today.
Alexia, I'm expecting great things from you. So you are wonderful. So thank you for inviting me to this.
Of course. Now we are going to get started with our next 15 minutes of Q&A, and we have a lot of questions from the audience. We are so excited to hear your responses.
Are you going to field those or should I read them?
I'm going to read them to you.
Okay.
So the first question is it recommended that you pursue the MD-PhD path to become a pathologist, or are there pathologists who would pursue the MD route?
You know, I get asked that all the time because I was an MD-PhD. I am an MD-PhD, but was also one of the pioneers in the Harvard program for that. And I've got to tell you, this is the truth. The reason I went into the MD-PhD program because it was brand new and fully funded. So it meant that I got 2 free doctorates from Harvard. They paid all my tuition for both degrees and even gave me a stipend to live on. That was, to me, I come from a poor family. I am lower middle class. My father was a carpenter who worked construction. My mother had a little antique shop. They were both very energetic and hardworking, but they didn't have much money. So everything that I've done in my life, I've had to finance on my own. So I didn't mention that, but I think you need to be a little savvy about where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck. And this was an offer. I was astounded even that such a thing existed, let alone that they would consider me and further admit me to the program. But here was the catch, and you're always going to have a catch. I was double registered in the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences at Harvard and the Harvard Medical School. They had different requirements. And they had, the graduate school, for example, was not pass-fail like the medical school. It was on a grading scale of A, B, C, D, E. And if you didn't maintain an A average through your PhD work, and prelims for the PhD, you got kicked out of the program. So, and in fact, if you didn't finish all the degree requirements for both degrees, you not only got kicked out of the program, but you had to repay all the tuition. So I was under huge pressure being in this program. I tried not to think about it too much, but it was incentivization through fear. There's no question about it. But at the end of the day, look what I got. And I can't say with a straight face that people should do MD, PhD. It was a long haul, a very long process. And, you know, I didn't get my first job until I was 30, people. So, you know, do you want to squander your youth doing this or not? In fact, I set the land speed record for getting a PhD at Harvard. In the department I was in, it took 7 years just to get a PhD. And I got both degrees in 7 years. So, you know, it was, and it was also very hard for me to go back to the clinic after working for 4.5 years on my thesis work. I never saw a patient during that time. I couldn't even remember which end of the stethoscope was up. And all of my classmates from the first 2 years in medical school were now chief resident. You know, they were in lofty positions and they were so experienced. And again, I felt that I had to go back to first principles and learn it all. Again, it was really hard. Wow. Here's my advice. If you want, it depends on how much in a hurry you are, but an MD degree is the most versatile degree on the planet. You can do anything with an MD degree. The National Cancer Institute directors that were there when I was there, and the National Institute of Health directors while I was there, we're all MDs. Francis Collins has not practiced medicine. It didn't harm his academic career, it didn't harm his scientific career. So I think you can go anywhere you want with an MD. The thing that the MD-PhD does for you is it gives you credibility in both camps because the bias still lives on. All of the MDs think PhDs are just people who couldn't get into medical school. And all the PhDs think that MDs are just complete scientific dilettantes and don't know anything. So if you have an MD degree, it gives you a little bit of credibility in both camps. That's all I'll say about that.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing. Our next question is, what is your thought process when making a diagnosis based on, for example, a patient's urine sample?
So you have to know the limits of the tests that you're doing and certainly the biospecimen that you're dealing with and what it represents in terms of the patient's physiology and pathophysiology. So you have to really understand what normal is and before you can diagnose deviations from normal in any biospecimen. So I would say that any specimen, that the hardest thing about pathology is knowing for absolute certain what the variety of normal, the variations of normal look like. So that you can readily recognize when something is off the charts. And then when it's off the charts, what is the differential diagnosis of this particular molecular profile in this particular specimen? And do I need another specimen? Do I need to send the clinician back to get a blood draw? Do I need a biopsy? I look at the x-rays and the MRIs and I said, you know, no, you got to get in there with a guided MRI and get a piece of that lump. That's going to make, and so I'm always guiding the clinicians about my suspicions. I'm raising the bar for them for getting close to the diagnosis as possible. And in fact, in cases where pathology really reigns, is making the absolute diagnosis on anybody's differential list. And that, to me, is the thrill and of working in pathology. Absolutely. So yeah, I know the specimen, know the limits, know the test, know what else you need to, it's like a crossword puzzle, right? You get the 11 down, but you need the 24 across. And so you just go and get it.
Absolutely, thank you so much. Next question. Are there a great amount of jobs available for pathologists? How many pathologists are generally employed per hospital?
So there's a shortage of pathologists, people, just saying. You will not have trouble getting a job in clinical medicine. So, but there are lots of flavors of pathology practice. The one I chose was academic pathology in big teaching hospitals. But there is big pathology going on as businesses. All of these big reference labs, Foundation One, Caris, these are all big, enormous businesses. They are machines, but they are they have the latest technology. They have a high bar to meet, because pathology, I didn't mention this, but pathology is regulated by the federal government. It is in fact illegal to use a diagnosis that comes out of a laboratory that is not approved and certified by CMS, according to a federal law called CLIA, the Clinical Laboratory Improvement Act. Before that act became federal law, you could do a test in your garage and use the results to manage patients. That is now illegal. You go to jail if you do that. So you have to, what CLIA does is set the standards for quality in the environment of pathology testing. And so it's a guarantee that every diagnosis that comes out of a CLIA approved laboratory is of very high quality. You can depend on the diagnosis being made, and you can confidently use that data to manage your patients. So you're always, meeting federal requirements. And so these big businesses that are pathology practices must meet those same requirements, unlike any other business.
Thank you so much for that answer. Next question.
Oh, by the way, they need pathologists in industry. They need you in pharmaceutical companies. They need you in diagnostic companies. They need you at the FDA. So just saying, there's all kinds of possibilities.
All right, I'm going to do 3 questions into one.
Okay.
One is, how long is residency to become a pathologist? 2, how competitive is a pathology specialty compared to other specialties? And 3, can medical students do a pathology rotation?
Yes, you can do a pathology rotation. Depends on the medical school, though, as to whether it's required or elective. Okay. At Harvard, it was an elective, and I only took it because Ramsey Cotran was on my thesis defense committee and extolled the virtues of pathology. I thought, I just have to go see what that's all about, and I was mesmerized from day one. It's usually, I think in most medical schools, it's not required. So I would pursue it, in other words. I would, go get it. Pathology residency depends on whether you are boarding in anatomic pathology, which are biopsies, organs, cytology. So making diagnoses from the way that cells and tissues look under the microscope, the way they look grossly, and the patterns of molecules that you see in those cells and tissues using techniques like immunohistochemistry or in situ hybridization. But you're looking at cells and tissues, and it's beautiful, right? Even H&Es they're pink and blue, and they're very artistic. So they fulfill an aesthetic need of mine. But clinical pathology is laboratory medicine, and it's a whole set of training unto itself. It's hematology and blood. It's microbiology and infectious diseases. It is blood banking. It is clinical chemistry. And it's all full of the latest and greatest technologies and robots that you have. Then it spits out, these machines do spit out an analysis, a molecular analysis that you interpret in light of your pathology training to make a diagnosis. And you're always triangulating a lot of different results to come up with either a diagnosis at the time or a consultation to the clinician. Now you need a lipid profile test. You're guiding them toward getting the right tests that are going to lead to the right diagnosis. And that takes, so I did combined training in 4 years. I think combined training now is 5 years. And just AP is 4. And so I'm actually not the best person to tell you about that. Actually, I don't know, strictly speaking, what the different combinations of training would look like. And especially if you take a year in the middle to do research, that also extends your training. But it's in range with, say, doing surgery and doing a surgical specialty at the end.
Thank you so much for that answer. I'm going to do one more question. We have about 3 minutes left. So no pressure to answer within 3 minutes, but the question is, what challenges and obstacles have you experienced, especially with your experience going into the specialty, and how did you overcome them?
There are 2 types of obstacles, one that are external and ones that are internal. My internal ones had to do with my trepidation, my feeling of being inadequate to the task. I felt that at every single step. So that was really the biggest obstacle, is that, and as a result, I love Nike's signature saying, just do it, just do it, folks. Just get out there and do it. And that will dissipate. Once you realize you can do it, you are doing it, then, but you never feel adequate up front. So those were, and that was repetitive for me. I felt that way. It gets a little better at the end of, as time goes by, but every time you take on a new challenge, that same old demon is there. And then there were the external ones. So I'm really old, people, and I went into pathology when I went into medicine when there was a cap on women at Harvard Medical School. 15% women, that's it. When no women were allowed into surgical residencies at Harvard, no women, 0 zip, and where pathology was actually woman friendly, relatively speaking. And so I think that was the other thing that an MD-PhD did for me. It put me a little bit ahead of the guys with whom I was competing. But I kept meeting the prejudice. It's really very insulting, just assuming that you're not a serious scholar, that what you're doing isn't very important. Go wash bottles at the lab bench, little girl. Those kind of dismissive attitudes that I found throughout my career. And my secret was, you just ignore them and go do what you want to do. And then at the end of the day, you've written your NIH grants and you've been funded. Now you've got 20 people working for you in your own laboratory. Now you've written 300 papers, and all of a sudden the admissions committee says, oh, I guess we should promote her. So if you don't take it too seriously, do not take it personally, ever. That's the biggest mistake you can make. Just keep going and just keep focused and just ignore them. Absolutely. That's 3 minutes worth of advice. Sorry.
Wow. You are so inspirational. That was amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today. I still have a couple questions left in the Q&A. So if you are available,
absolutely,
please feel free to click on the Q&A button and type in the answers individually. And if you have any questions in the chat or comments, feel free to add those as well.
Okay. And again, I just want, my hopes for the future of medicine are listening today. So I can't tell you how much I'm counting on you to be the best that you can possibly be for the patients of the future, which are going to include me. So when you're taking care of me, I want you to be the best of yourselves. Thanks everybody for inviting me. Bye,
I'll make
Alexia.
me cry. Oh,
Oh,
it's just so inspirational. Thank you so much for joining us. You
you're
have a
welcome.
great rest of your week. Thank you. All right, on to our next session. Magda, if you would like to share your screen and introduce the next speaker.
Hi, so I actually don't have it pulled up, but I will go ahead and introduce Yash.